My guest today is film producer Miles David Romney, and as CEO of V42 Venture Studio Fund, and he then built the largest network of influencer media promoters, built consumer streaming experiences that powered ESPN, DirecTV, EA, even Blizzard, and a managing partner of six-time Tony-winning Broadway producer 42nd Club, which is responsible for Moulin Rouge, Hadestown, and Beetlejuice. He then built Radiate Media to a 50-time revenue increase, operating over 1,500 TV, radio, and newspaper properties, then sold to GTN. But he is the founder of MAST Media Accelerator, whose first animated film, 95 Senses, is critically acclaimed and is Oscar nominated for 2024. This animated short film marks Jared and Jerusha Hess's first foray into animation. So how's that for the creators of Napoleon Dynamite? Let's welcome producer Miles Romney and the Oscar-nominated animated short 95 Senses to the show. Welcome, Miles.
Well, thank you so much, Ward. It is a pleasure and honor to be here.
Well,
And thank you for the terrific introduction.
well, I had to shorten it because your resume is extremely long.
it's I've always said that variety is the spice of life.
It is. Well, how did you get into producing 95 Senses?
Yeah, it really came out of. I have been an animator since I was a teenager. I One of my first ventures as an entrepreneur was an animation studio called Dream Seeker Studios. And we were the last ones, in fact, to work directly with Art Clokey, the legendary creator of Gumby, on Gumby content before he passed away. And in those early days, in fact, I remember that one of my marks of honor was a cease and desist that we got from Will Vinton Studios in those days. Now they're Leica Studios, because we had developed a technology called digiclaymation, we were calling it. But they claimed a copyright infringement. So we changed it very cheerfully to digiclay animation and did a lot of the early work in digitally rendered animation that was made to look like clay animation. We developed techniques for programmatically moving thumbprints on the surfaces and distorting the geometry very subtly to make it look like it was clay animated, matching the frame rates and movement patterns that you typically see in stop motion. That was a lot of fun. And from there, I started working more in live action and just took the executive path primarily from there. Built a media company, Radiate Media, as you mentioned, was running a whole lot of media properties when we sold it. Was a producer on some documentaries, then ran the distributor Yekra, which was very technology enabled, and we built a new model for independent filmmakers for being able to push out indie film through our network of thousands of tastemakers. And we set some great records at that time for revenue generated through indie films released on the web. So I ended up taking more of the executive path. And then when I left the film distributor, I was looking for some other way to really enable indie filmmakers. And I was an advisor to the Salt Lake Film Society at the time. Tori Baker is the visionary CEO over there. And for a few years, we just started bouncing ideas back and forth about what we might do for the independent film community, and also to allow filmmakers, regional filmmakers, starting with Salt Lake City, which is where Salt Lake Film Society is based, to stay where they are and to tell stories that are local to their own experiences in their own regions, to really contribute to a greater diversity of stories being told nationwide without everything kind of being told through the lenses of New York and LA. So we started MAST with that intent, with the intent of building a fellowship program, which we did, selecting fellows to come into the program, to be mentored. We connect them with mentors in the industry, help them sell their work into the industry, give them grant money to finish their own projects, and then also work on collaborative projects that MAST orchestrates. And the first one of those is 95 Senses. And that has been a fascinating process. We started it with a worldwide contest and had thousands of submissions from animators the world over. We also scoured YouTube and Behance and other online platforms looking for promising talent that hadn't landed at a major studio or animation studio, and invited them to submit. And in the end, we picked this just beautiful team of 6 winners, and from there knew that we had to write a script and build a project around 6 totally different animation styles. Because another aspect of this that was really important to us was letting each one of those animators show his or her work up on the screen. We didn't just want to take them all and normalize them and put their technical talents into the service of one person's visual vision. We wanted each one of them to bring a unique aesthetic and to highlight all of those on the screen. And then at that point, I went to longtime friends Hubble Palmer and Chris Bowman, and who are very talented screenwriters, and said, "Guys, here's what I've got. I've got 6 teams of animators, each with a unique aesthetic. I need a story that can make sense of this, that can really highlight it and make narrative, not just kind of work around this, but really build in a narrative reason for it." And they brought back the beautiful script, which in its first draft was called My Five Senses, because it centers on the story told by the character Coy through his memories and his 5 senses. And then at that point went to Jerusha and Jared Hess, who had worked with Hubble and Chris on several projects previously, and who also had been friends and supporters of the Film Society. And I actually did a short film years ago with Jared, and they were on board. They loved the idea. They loved the idea of coming on and mentoring animators, bringing them together as a cohesive whole, bringing their real talent for narrative arc and making every story personal. Clearly, this project was a different flavor than what they had done in the past, which is another aspect of it that I think really appealed to them. They got to dive into something that had some laughs in it, but also at its core is a very thoughtful drama, and an animation. And they're doing a lot of work in animation now. They have a Netflix animated movie called Thelma and the Unicorn coming out in a few months here, and some other projects in the works. As Jerusha says, animation is really feeling like home to them at this point. And I'm thrilled that 95 Senses and MAST could be part of that transition for them into this new medium. But in the end, we ended up with a fantastic group of animators, great screenwriters, incredible directors, and we made it happen. I could tell you a lot more about the technicalities of how that happened, particularly because COVID hit us in the middle of production, and we had to make some changes to the way that we were producing, of course. But one of the advantage, well, I won't say, animation was able to carry forward in a better way than live action production was during COVID, because so much of that can be done remotely in a distributed way. So it didn't stop us. It did slow us down a little bit, gave us introduced a few weird delays, but we carried forward through it, and then on the other side of it, hit the festival circuit hard.
Well, I loved the short film 95 Senses. It's one of the very few films this Oscar season that left me with that long, lingering thought about the importance of life around us.
Good.
Here is this incredible story. And when I talked to Jerusha, I love the fact that you had 6 different animators on this film. Each one of their own designs in animation flowed so well together in telling the story that as you're watching the film, it's not chopped up in any way. It flows with such a grace that, and it's funny. So you have a lot of your senses paying attention to what Coy is saying and telling that story. Then your eyes are seeing the different forms of animation, but it's not registering to the audience that they're actually noticing the variations of animation. So it worked so beautifully in this film. But for you, when it came to the story of Coy, what interested you the most about it?
It was the redemption arc. I love, and kind of a principle of my work in this industry has a really foundational principle has always been what I call spinach in the popcorn. Uh, I don't I don't like to tell preachy stories. I don't like people to feel like they're coming in and they're being pointed along one particular ideological or political or philosophical path. I like it first and foremost to be good entertainment that people love to sit down and watch. But then I always insist that we put some element in there that sends people away thinking about the film and thinking about the idea for hours or days or weeks afterwards. That's the mark of success in my mind, where people can sit there for the duration of the film and feel like they've been entertained, but then go away thinking about it for a long time afterwards. And the way that Chris and Hubble constructed this story is so beautiful because it is all about it's tragic, but there's a hope in the midst of the tragedy. And this emerged really from the extensive research that they did on death row inmates. They watched hours and hours of footage of interviews with death row inmates who were on their way to execution in the Texas Huntsville unit, and came to identify several common character traits that then they built into Coy as a pastiche. Uh, for example, they often are expressing, particularly after having had years and years to think about it, they typically are expressing remorse for what they did. To a greater or lesser degree, are taking responsibility for it. Very often, also dreaming of the lives that they could have had if they hadn't made those mistakes. And then also, and this is the quirkiest one that comes out in such a charming way in Coy, they often have a kind of erudition, which is unexpected because they've been in prison with nothing else to do but read. So you do end up with some kind of know-it-alls, in some case, kind of charmingly insufferable know-it-alls, and that comes out in Coy, where he's using big words and talking about concepts like the changing shape of eyeballs because of the use of mobile devices in young people, bringing out, and even his call out to 95 senses, which is another concept that came from his reading and ended up being the title. His talking about the notion that after we die, it could be that we have an expansion of our sensory input, and that it could be that we don't have 5 senses anymore, but we have 95 senses.
But see, what I loved about that, Miles, is when Coy mentioned that, maybe we have 95 senses, and he's talking about the afterlife. But the way that Coy describes it, I sat there and I was like, he's visualizing eternity in a beautiful way, not in hellfire because he'd been to prison. A lot of people ask me, well, criminals go to heaven. I said, well, yeah, because one of the ones that hung on the side of Jesus went with him. And so there is redemption. And for Coy to be in prison, and I told Jerusa this because I was astonished, because in the film, Coy mentions Lake Conroe. And I only live 5 to 10 miles from Lake Conroe.
Do you really?
Yes. And so with Huntsville, Texas, a lot of people think that that's where all the death row inmates are housed. Well, they're usually housed in a unit in Livingston, Texas, and then when
Yeah.
that day comes, or those 3 days prior, then they're driven from there to Huntsville for that day. And
Yeah.
so when you said Huntsville, because I told Teresa, like, yeah, Huntsville, because if you mention Lake Conroe, the only place close enough for prison is going to be Huntsville. And so I understood that. But there,
Yeah.
to have Coy.
Well, you bring a lot more contextual knowledge to it than most of the viewers do, so that I'm glad that it rings true for you as well.
Yeah, because when he mentioned the 95 senses, I thought this is that was the beautiful part, because for me, he was envisioning eternity as being this incredible, awesome place, and that's what I wish for everyone. But he is within those four walls for his whole life, but he still envisioned something beautiful when that day came, and I thought that was one of the for me, most amazing parts of this story.
It is for us as well, and it's what also, in my mind, makes it so accessible as a conversation starter. It doesn't because again, it's not preachy. It's not coming in, and you could say that it's a film that has that has a lot to do with the death penalty and incarceration. And those are things that in the future I think we'll really want to delve into and explore as aspects of the film. Though right now we're really focusing on it as a piece of art with the themes of redemption and hope in the face of travail. But the beautiful aspect of it is that it can be viewed on both of those levels, and that you'll watch it and come away not thinking, okay, I now should have a particular activation when it comes to the political issue of the death penalty, but rather it gives you a sense that maybe you should just think about it. Maybe you had never thought about it before, and now just give it some thought. And in my mind, that is the best way, the only effective way to approach any of the really sticky wickets that we face as a society. When we try to approach any of these difficult problems from predefined extreme partisan positions, it becomes nearly impossible to define any kind of a middle ground, go forward approach. But if instead we're all approaching them with open minded empathy, and our only conviction is a conviction of listening, and then thinking and understanding, and then bringing our personal conclusions to bear. That's not to say that then opinions won't differ and people will want to defend them strongly. But if we can always start from a position of empathy, that's how we build solutions. And that's what our political climate and even social climate today, in my mind, is missing so extremely, is
It
that
is.
starting place of
It's
empathy.
lacking empathy. And you brought up something early, and you brought up claymation, and you brought up Gumby.
Yeah.
When you were saying that, when I was growing up as a kid, I remember all the episodes of Gumby, but I remember David and Goliath even more because it was on like public television. And
Yeah.
like 95 Senses is not preachy whatsoever, but neither was David and Goliath. So you had a boy and
Yeah.
his dog. There was always a lesson to be learned, but it wasn't shoving it into your face. And when I saw 95 Senses, it almost reminded me of that same tone of teaching that David and Goliath brought to so many kids across the country back in the day. That's why this film is so beautiful.
Yeah. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad that it makes that callback for you. I think that's just the emotional tone that we're going for.
And with the six animators, they must have had a really great time working on this project because um, how did the animation actually work? Because did Tim Blake Nelson, did he voice his parts prior or was it after? And
Yeah.
so, because with the animators, they were actually, their animation is diving into Koi's past.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And what's fascinating is I think from day one, well, Chris and Hubble will tell you that as they were writing the script, they heard the voice of Tim Blake Nelson. He was their muse. And it was a fantastic coincidence that when Jared and Jerusha came on, well, either a coincidence or extremely effective imbuing of Tim Blake Nelson's personality into the actual writing of the script, because they looked at it and they said, "Oh, this has got to be Tim Blake Nelson." And they made a call to Tim. We went out to dinner with him. He and his wife Lisa, such lovely people, so incredibly talented, both in their own rights. Tim on the screen, Lisa on stage. Teaches at Columbia, teaches acting at Columbia, and Tim was so complimentary of the Hesses. Said that Napoleon Dynamite was one of the most important artistic filmic properties in his household, and that he'd always wanted to work with the Hesses. And so then we took the script and Tim and went right into the recording studio in New York, and he laid it down. And Jared and Jerusha gave him some direction in that process, but for the most part, he came having very deeply thought it out. He's from that region of the country, so there are cultural references that really resonated with him as well. And then we cut together that track and gave it to the animators. And then Jared and Jerusha could work with each of the animators with the narration already in place. But another unique aspect of the script is it was written deliberately, again by Chris and Hubble, without mise en scène, without environmental or action instructions, without really any information on what the animators should be depicting under the voiceover. And Jared and Jerusha they bought into that immediately and gave each of the animators the freedom to bring their own ideas to the table on what they wanted to depict. Sometimes that ended up being fairly fairly literal. In the case, for example, of what Jared Matthews and Dallin Penman did in the smell section that has more of the Disney feel. And that, incidentally, Jared Matthews subsequently landed a gig with Disney, which is fantastic, which is the purpose of the film, right? To highlight the talents of these animators and help them as an entree into the industry, or helping them expand the nascent careers that they'd already built. But even in that case, where it is more literal, one of the two most striking, I would say, two or three most striking moments in the film is when Grandma turns around to her grandson who had stolen a Reader's Digest and hits him with it and berates him for having stolen it when he had done it innocently just because he wanted to memorize the jokes. And then they pull out into a more deconstructed, figurative aesthetic, and it's very powerful because of that. Because they had stuck more with the literal programmatic visual approach, and then pulled out into a moment of more abstraction. It makes it really powerful. Then you have people like Nika Harrison, who with Scott McHenry, who did the sight section that was so beautifully abstract. Though some of it is literal. She talks about Lake Conroe and snorkeling, and then you'll see Koi there snorkeling. But then it goes into more fanciful depictions of the turtles and the fish, and it's beautiful that way. And it highlights one of the real powers of animation. Also, is that it can just move fluidly out of literalism and figurative and a figurative approach to trigger the most effective emotional response in watching them. And in the best animations, you'll see them just move fluidly in and out, and audiences oftentimes won't even realize that it's happening. And that was managed and that was managed beautifully. Casey Toby, he did the taste section. That was he took a more literal approach there, but again, it also was a fanciful approach because he came to the table and said, "Yeah, I could just be showing Coy in prison getting his prison food, but why don't we put him in a 5-star restaurant while he's telling this story?" And then the Hesses said, "Yeah, and there can be that real key moment when the bun's being put on the burger, and then the colors all change, and everyone's uniforms change to prison uniforms, and we see that they're actually in prison." And that ended up being a really powerful moment
It
too. Again,
was.
bringing in a figurative element with the literal, and the point at which it switches from one to the other is an emotional catch point.
Yeah,
And
when
then
the grandmother, when the grandmother yelled at young Coy, I mean, you felt you felt not you felt being on the end of her anger. I mean, I
yeah,
felt sorry for Coy, and it was almost like she was yelling at you. I mean, when you watched it. And then you're right, when it came to the tasting scenes, when Coy's explaining, and then you see that turn, like you said in the animation, from a 5-star, all of a sudden it's really the prison kitchen. And I was
yeah,
like, wow. Because my first thought was, I didn't know that. Because I knew that a lot of the facts were based on truth. So I was like, man, this is just incredible. But I have to ask you, because one thing I've never understood, because with short films, it gets, I've talked to so many directors, and it's very, very tough in the editing process. But with an animated short, you have 6 animators. How do you edit that? How much footage or animation does each animator bring, that when the story is put together, how do you edit that? Especially when you're looking at
yeah.
a particular time limit for to be classified as a short film.
Yeah. So in this case, fortunately, we didn't have to worry too much about the time limit because we have all the way up to 40 minutes. So we had a lot of latitude there. So we just knew that the edit just needed to be as narratively and aesthetically impactful as it could be. And with animation, particularly, you really don't want to overproduce. You don't want to get coverage like you would get in a live action production. You really don't want to show up to the editor giving him too many choices, because it means that you've spent a lot of time and money animating frames that, particularly with hand animation, the way that this was done, you can end up spending twice as much on the budget as you needed to. So it's much more common with animation to come to it with very detailed and authoritative, almost locked storyboards, so that the animators are doing every shot at as they see it in the storyboards, knowing that that's where it's going to fit in. And a very important part of the process is generating what's called an animatic early on, where we take the voiceover, add some sound design to it, take our storyboards, cut them up, do a little very rough animation, get it all into sequence, so that the directors can really get a sense for the pacing, and then at that point make their suggestions and tweaks on the pacing, so that you end up with a pretty close to finished product in terms of its length, pacing, arc, before the animators go in to start doing the frame by frame animation. That said, we did end up cutting about 40 seconds at the end, where when we saw it all together, it was clear that there were a couple of moments that just didn't need to be there. They lengthened maybe an emotional anticipation a little longer than was optimal in order to get the payoff that we all were really looking for. But yeah, for the most part, it's almost pre-edited.
Wow. Now, what was it like when the Oscar nominations were announced, and what was the day like for the whole team on 95 Senses?
Yeah, it was an amazing thing. Because you go into something like this, and you never really know what the reception is going to be. I always had high hopes. In fact, some others on the team were kind of chuckling at me because when I brought Chris and Hubble onto the project, I said, "Guys, we're not doing this on a lark. We've got fantastic animators here. We're looking to build an accelerator that can make many films into the future. Uh, I I'm looking for a script that could win an Oscar." And they came back with that story. And then with the Hesses, I said, guys, we're resourcing this such that, and we're planning ahead so that we're going to be able to run a campaign when that time comes, and we're going to hit the festival circuit really hard. We are treating this as though we will arrive on the Oscars shortlist. That's as far as I went. I said, guys, let's get this thing onto the Oscars shortlist. And if we can get onto the shortlist, then we can have proven the model, and we will know that we've built a pipeline model, a talent discovery system here that is sustainable and that we can use over and over again. So we were ecstatic when we got onto the shortlist. And then I gathered the whole team together on a Google Meet at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time to watch the nomination announcements. And at that point, we were really hopeful, and we'd had some very generous and beautiful shout outs from Taika Waititi and Jack Black and Phil Lord and Chris Miller and Chris Williams. So the attention was had all given us really great momentum, and people who know this space, and who know, and Ed Catmull gave us a fantastic shout out, a co-founder of Pixar and former president of Disney Animation Studios, called it a beautiful film and said he loved it. So we had a lot of luminaries who it was really resonating with, and that took us. So we felt the momentum. But even so, you just never know. And there are films that we thought were shoe-ins for the nominations that didn't end up making them, and we were really disappointed to see that. But yeah, when we were all sitting there early in the morning, and our name was the second one listed, it just, you can't quite predict how that's going to, how your brain's going to react. And
It proved,
then
but like you said, it proved your model. So what does an Oscar nomination or even an Oscar win mean to a production company?
Yeah, it's bona fides. It means that that we know what we're doing at this point. We could do it at least once. There's a chance that we can replicate it, and it means even more in this case because we have a distinctive model. Um, and so for MAST, now we can go out because it's a 501c3, it's a nonprofit. Now we can go out to fundraisers and say, look at the differences that we have made in these animators' lives by giving them this feather in the cap. They now have been animators on an Oscar-nominated film, which is a big deal for their careers. Which means we will be able to more sustainably fundraise around this program, which lets us produce our next film with our next cohort of animators, and our next one, and our one after that. At the same time, we now have to start continuing to be really creative because we can't aesthetically do the same thing over and over again. So next year's film is not. It's not going to be that it's going to be multiple animators. It's going to represent several visual styles, but not in the way that this one did. It'll be beautiful to watch, and it'll be unique in the field, but it will be different than this one. And then the year after that, we have to come up with a way of doing something different again. So every year's film absolutely won't be aesthetically built along the same model, but we do plan to carry forward our discovery process of finding new talented animators, bringing them into the project, pairing them with mentors who can really help them understand a professional animation pipeline and be part of producing a cohesive piece that then goes on to the festival circuit and maybe rises to the level of this one. Of course, there's always the kind of superstitious danger that having done so well on the first one, it's there's nowhere to go but downhill. But I am an incurable optimist, and I see this as an indication that we hit upon a really great model for producing short animation, and we're going to carry it forward. And the short form is so important because this is where indie still really lives. This is where the little film that could stories almost always come from every year. And it also is an experimental medium where you can see things both visually and tonally that are harder to commit to on a higher budget feature length piece. Though sometimes, like the Spider-Verse films were incredibly innovative in their aesthetic styles, and because of their multiverse approach, even in the way they approach characters, showing different versions of the same character. So they managed to do something in my mind that it is groundbreaking and probably the most significant move in animation that we've seen in a decade or two. So it was a huge honor when Phil Lord and Chris Miller hosted one of our For Your Consideration screenings. And Phil Lord, in fact, quipped. He said, "It took us a whole feature film to get this many aesthetics in, and you guys managed to do it in 13 minutes."
Well, can the public see 95 Senses now?
Yeah. If you just go to 95senses.org, all one word, then there's a link off there to our distributor, Documentary Plus. Documentary Plus, typically they buy documentaries, but they saw this as being so additive to a lot of their nonfiction content, and because it was based on a pastiche of real people, they were very enthusiastic about it and have been a great support. Also, we're included in the Oscar Shorts program that's going on to 700 some odd screens on February 16th. So go to your local cinema and you can see all 5 of the short animated nominees.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, head over to 95senses.org. You've got to see one of the best animated short films ever, and it rightly deserves its Oscar nomination. And Miles, good luck at the 96th Academy Awards for you and the whole team. We're going to be cheering you on.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
You bet. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, again, head over to 95senses.org. Check out this amazing animated short film. And to think that this is their first foray into animation, I can tell you one thing. I can't wait to see what else they're going to produce year after year, pushing the envelope of animation and storytelling. These are the ones to watch. So, ladies and gentlemen, the beauty of this film, 95 Senses, cannot be overlooked. Academy members, this deserves your vote. And as for my viewers and listeners, don't ignore the power of your 5 senses. Look up, see past your smartphone, walk in the forest or a garden and smell nature. Give a gentle touch to someone who needs some encouragement. And there is also a culinary world out there waiting on you to explore. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can catch all of the replays of our interviews with top film directors and producers, screenwriters, actors, and more on our website at bondoncinema.com. And we're also available on YouTube and a dozen audio platforms as well. Thank you for watching and listening. And as for me, I'll see you from the red carpet.